The energy transition is really complex. That's why we need lots of different kinds of solutions, and that's where Gridcog comes in. It's an integrated and flexible platform for modelling all sorts of different kinds of projects. Today, I'm going to have a look at modelling a public EV charging site. So let's imagine a scenario where we've got a development site in Brighton. We want to install two 250 kilowatt chargers, and we've spoken to the DNO, and they said we're going to have to upgrade the network capacity at the site from 150 kilowatts to 500 kilowatts. That's going to cost around £300,000. So let's set up our baseline scenario. I'll show you how that's configured, and then we'll start looking at some alternative scenarios with the battery energy storage system. Let's take a look at Gridcog. You can see here in our baseline scenario that we've got our connection augmentation cost, our electrical infrastructure at that site, and our two 250 kilowatt EV chargers. One of the things that we can do in Gridcog is we can bring in a utilisation assumption of the library. This is our assumption around how the charger might change over future years in our 10-year project modelling period. We'll also bring in some CapEx and OpEx costs and an assumed price that we're going to sell electricity at. Great. Now we can clone that scenario, and we can update the scenario to reflect getting our capacity not from the connection augmentation with the DNO, but from a stationary battery. So I'm going to delete that connection cost. We're going to update our connection settings to reflect the existing 150 kilowatt connection we've got. I'm going to add in our stationary battery. And we don't know how big this battery should be, so let's go for auto sizing. And again, we'll bring in some CapEx and OpEx assumptions. And now we've got our project model. Let's run the simulation and see what happens. Okay, our project simulation is finished. Let's take a look at the results. We're going to start by looking at the cash flows. In our baseline scenario, you can see that our project is just about break even over the 10-year modelling period. In our project scenario with the BESS, our net position is actually slightly better, even though we've got higher CapEx costs because of the BESS. Now, let's look at the relative cash flows. That's the difference against the baseline, and we can see that our site owner is about £81,000 better off, and that's a result of reduced network service cost, reduced retail cost, but they do have some higher CapEx costs. And our retailer has actually started to earn some ancillary services revenue from the BESS because we've allowed them to participate in the way that we set up the commercial model, but because they've got less retail revenue, they're slightly worse off. Let's look at some interval profiles. In the chart at the top here, we can see our EV charging events with the higher network capacity. You can see we're not using all of that network capacity in our first year. We'll start to see how that grows in our future years with our increased utilisation of the charger. In our alternative scenario here with the battery, we can see the changing state of charge of the battery as it responds to those EV charging events and tries to manage down maximum demand at the site. Now, because in this first year we're not having a lot of utilisation of the charger, we're not using all of that network capacity, let's go and look at some future load growth. So this chart is showing us how the shape of the load at the site is going to change into those future years. And this is the scenario with the BESS. We can see here that we're using a lot more of that existing 150 kilowatts of network capacity in those final years. So the results give us a really detailed look at both the commercial outcomes and the technical outcomes of the project. So this is just one example of how Gridcog can be used to model energy projects. And in later videos in this series, we'll look at other kinds of projects, including co-located solar and battery projects, commercial microgrids, and residential virtual power plants. We can't wait to show you more.